Hey everyone, welcome to our Adolescence for Teens on the Autism Spectrum.
Absolutely.
It's a really big topic and one that I know lots of you are eager to learn more about.
For sure.
So we've got some fascinating research to dig into.
Yeah, and what we really want to do today is help you better understand this period of life and how you can support your autistic teens.
Right, because it is a time of just incredible change and growth, but also some really unique challenges, and that's what we're going to unpack together.
Exactly.
One of the things that I found really interesting is just how much biology plays a role.
Yeah.
We tend to think of adolescence as all about the social stuff, but
Yeah.
there's actually a lot happening hormonally that really impacts autistic teens differently than neurotypical teens.
Yeah. And a big one is cortisol.
Cortisol, right?
Everyone's body releases cortisol when they're stressed, but research suggests that teens on the spectrum tend to have higher baseline levels of cortisol.
Okay.
So it's like their stress system is always a bit on edge. So it's not just them being, difficult or oppositional or whatever.
Right.
There's a biological reason why they might be feeling overwhelmed more easily.
Exactly. And this can lead to what we call dysregulation. Those behaviors that might seem extreme, but are actually tied to this constant state of heightened stress.
Okay.
Think about it. If you were feeling that way all the time, you'd probably have trouble keeping your cool too.
Right, you would.
Yeah.
And this is on top of all the regular teenage hormones that everyone's dealing with.
Exactly. It can make for a really intense time.
It's no wonder this period is so tough.
Yeah. And there's another biological piece that's important to be aware of.
Okay.
Around a quarter of people on the spectrum start having seizures during adolescence.
Oh, wow.
Now, these don't always look like the dramatic seizures you see in movies. Sometimes they manifest as more subtle behavioral changes.
Interesting. So, what, like increased aggression or maybe zoning out more often?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Things that could easily be mistaken for typical teenage moodiness. That's why regular checkups with a doctor who really understands autism are crucial during this time. Early detection can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great reminder that, we're talking about adolescence, but it's important to keep that medical piece in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got this biological layer adding complexity, but, these sources also highlight some psychiatric considerations that are more common in autistic teens during adolescence.
Yeah, things like OCD, anxiety, and depression are statistically more likely.
And this makes sense when you think about it. The social challenges that come with autism can make this already socially intense period even harder.
Absolutely. It's like a double whammy.
Right. And it's not just about fitting in adolescence. It's about figuring out who you are, where you belong, and if you're constantly feeling out of sync socially, that's got to impact your self-esteem too.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can't forget about the physical changes puberty, especially for girls. The research mentions that menstruation with its own hormonal fluctuations can sometimes lead to increased obsessiveness, aggression, or anxiety in autistic girls.
Yeah, it's another layer of complexity.
So it's not just puberty in general, but the specific ways it might interact with autism that we need to be aware of.
Exactly. And it really highlights the importance of having a doctor who can distinguish between what's autism, what's a co-occurring condition, and what might just be a normal teenage phase.
Right. It's complicated.
It can be.
Yeah, you mentioned social challenges earlier, and one of the concepts from the sources that really stood out to me was theory of mind.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is and why it's particularly relevant during adolescence?
Sure. So theory of mind is basically the ability to understand that other people have different thoughts, beliefs, and perspectives than your own.
Okay.
It's something that develops naturally for most kids, but for many on the autism spectrum, it's a real struggle.
So it's not that they don't care about others, but they literally have a harder time grasping that someone else might see things totally differently than they do.
Precisely. And you can imagine how that plays out in adolescence when social dynamics become so much more complex, reading between the lines, understanding subtle cues, predicting how someone might react. These are all things that rely on theory of mind.
It makes me think about that story we read about Alex.
Yes.
This 12-year-old who's planning to get a girlfriend the day after his 16th birthday.
Oh, right.
Like it was just some appointment he could schedule.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how a literal understanding of the world combined with difficulty understanding other people's minds can lead to confusion and anxiety, and teenage social life is hard enough without that extra layer.
Absolutely. I'm guessing this ties into another concept that came up in the research, which is executive function.
It does.
So what's the connection there?
Well, executive function is that set of mental skills that help us plan, organize, regulate our emotions, and be flexible in our thinking. These skills develop over time, But for those on the autism spectrum, they often mature at a slower pace.
Okay, so while their peers are getting better at thinking ahead, controlling their impulses, adapting to new situations, autistic teens might still be struggling with those things.
Exactly. And think about how that plays out in social situations, which are all about reading cues, adjusting your behavior, understanding unspoken rules.
Right.
It can be really tough.
It can feel like everyone else got the instruction manual and they're just winging it.
Exactly.
So knowing all this, what are some key takeaways for, someone supporting a teen on the spectrum through these years?
Well, first remember that development isn't linear. There's this idea that once kids hit their teens, they should be able to handle more and more independence. But for autistic teens, that might not be the case.
The patience is key.
Absolutely.
Not pushing them to fit a typical timeline, but really meeting them where they're at.
Exactly. And another big takeaway is the importance of early intervention. If you start working with professionals early on, you can build a foundation of support and skills that will make this transition much smoother.
And what does that look like practically? What kind of support are we talking about?
It could be therapy, social skills groups, occupational therapy. There's a whole range. And the key is finding what works for your individual teen.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but really about tailoring the support to their specific needs and strengths.
Exactly. And it's about being proactive. Don't wait for things to reach a crisis point. If you see your team struggling, reach out for help. There are people who understand and can offer guidance.
That's great advice. So we covered a lot of ground already about biology and how puberty can impact autistic teens differently. Now, I know from what you shared that you're really interested in exploring the emotional side of things.
And it's a really important piece because adolescence is already an emotional roller coaster for anyone.
Right.
But for teens on the spectrum, there are some additional layers that can make it even more intense.
Yeah, one term from the sources that really stuck with me is alexithymia. Honestly, I'd never even heard of it before.
It's not a word you hear every day, but it describes something many autistic people experience. You know how sometimes you just have this feeling, but you can't find the words to express it?
Yeah.
Imagine that feeling amplified, almost like the emotions are trapped inside.
That's alexithymia. So it's not that they're emotionless,
No, not at all.
or that they have trouble putting those feelings into language.
Exactly. And it can make it really hard for teens to get the support they need. If you don't know how to explain what you're feeling, how do you ask for help?
Right.
That's why it's so important for parents and caregivers to be aware of this.
So instead of getting frustrated when our teen seems unable to tell us what's wrong,
Right.
we need to look for other clues, like changes in behavior, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sudden withdrawal, increased irritability, changes in sleep or appetite.
Okay.
These can all be signs that something's going on emotionally. And instead of just saying, use your words, we need to create a space where they feel safe to express themselves however they can.
Right. So that might mean being more observant, being more patient, meeting them where they're at emotionally, even if it doesn't make sense to us.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key aspect of the emotional landscape for autistic teens, sensory sensitivities.
Yes, absolutely. And it seems like those can get even more heightened during adolescence.
They can.
Why is that?
Well, think about all the changes happening in their brains and bodies. It's a lot to process for anyone, but for someone who's already sensitive to sensory input, it can be really overwhelming.
Okay.
On top of that, adolescence throws a whole bunch of new sensory experiences at them.
Right, like louder social gatherings, busier school hallways, stronger smells from perfumes or body sprays.
Exactly. Things that other teens might not even notice can feel like an assault to someone with sensory processing differences.
Right, it's like their sensory volume is turned way up.
Exactly. And that can lead to anxiety meltdowns, even physical pain in some cases.
It's so important for people to understand it's not just them being picky or overreacting. This is a real neurological difference.
Right. It's not something they can just control.
And it impacts their everyday lives.
It does. And that's where having a supportive environment at home can make a huge difference.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, think about things like noise-canceling headphones, dimming the lights, having a quiet space they can go to when things get too much.
It sounds like it's about anticipating those triggers and having a plan in place.
Exactly. Rather than waiting for a meltdown to happen and then trying to react.
Right. And also just respecting their preferences, because what might be soothing for one person could be really irritating for someone else.
Absolutely. You have to individualize it. Adolescence is all about navigating increasingly complex social situations, understanding subtle cues, interpreting body language, dealing with peer pressure,
Right.
all things that can be really tough for someone who struggles with social communication.
And it's not just about fitting in, it's about forming those deeper relationships,
Right.
navigating romantic interests, figuring out where you belong in the social world.
Exactly.
Yeah,
All of that can be confusing and stressful even for neurotypical teens.
right.
Imagine trying to decipher all those unwritten rules and social expectations when you're already wired to take things, literally miss those subtle cues, or struggle with reading facial expressions.
It must feel like everyone else is speaking a different language.
That's a great way to put it. Like they all got the secret rule book and you didn't.
Exactly. And it can be really isolating, especially during a time when teens are already feeling so much self-doubt and insecurity.
Absolutely.
So what can we do as parents or caregivers to support them? Because telling them to just be themselves doesn't really work when being themselves can lead to social rejection.
It doesn't. And I think it's about finding that balance between acceptance and helping them develop the skills they need to navigate the social world more effectively.
Okay.
This is where things like social skills groups can be really helpful.
Yeah, because they provide a safe space to practice, to
Right.
get feedback, to learn from others who understand what they're going through.
Exactly. It's like a social boot camp, but in a supportive, non-judgmental environment.
Yeah.
And it can make a huge difference in their confidence and ability to connect with others.
One thing that really struck me from these sources is that it's not just the autistic teen who's affected by all this. Their struggles become the family struggles.
That's so true. Oftentimes, parents find themselves in this constant state of worry and advocacy. Siblings might feel neglected or resentful. Communication breakdowns can become the norm. The whole family system is affected.
So it's not just about supporting the teen.
Yeah.
It's about supporting the whole family unit.
Exactly. And that's where things like family therapy can be incredibly beneficial.
Okay.
It's about creating a space where everyone can be heard, where they can learn how to better communicate and support each other.
It's about recognizing that everyone in the family is going through something and that everyone needs to feel understood.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads to a really important point that I want to emphasize: self-care.
Oh, that's huge. It's so easy to get caught up in caring for our teen that we forget to take care of ourselves.
Right. But you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're burnt out, stressed, and emotionally depleted, you're not going to be able to show up for your teen in the way they need.
So what does self-care even look like in this context? Because finding time for a bubble bath when you're dealing with meltdowns and appointments and all the rest,
Yeah.
it feels impossible.
It doesn't have to be these grand gestures.
Okay.
It's about finding small moments to recharge.
Yeah.
A walk in nature, a cup of tea, and silence a phone call with a friend.
Right.
And it's about being kind to yourself.
Not beating yourself up for the things you can't control.
Exactly. And remember, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
Yeah.
You're not meant to do this alone.
That's such a good reminder. And I think that applies not just to parents and caregivers, but to the teens themselves, too.
Absolutely. Teaching them self-advocacy skills, helping them build those coping mechanisms for stress and overwhelm. These are gifts that will serve them well throughout life.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the emotional challenges, the importance of support, the absolute necessity of self-care. But I'm curious, what are some signs that things are going well? What should we be looking for to know we're on the right track?
Well, one thing is increased communication.
Yeah.
Even if it's not perfect. If your teen is able to express their needs and feelings, even in a roundabout way, that's a huge win.
Yeah. What about those moments of joy, of connection? Because it's easy to get so focused on the challenges that we forget to celebrate the good stuff.
Absolutely. Those moments are so precious, whether it's a shared laugh, a successful social interaction, or just a sense of peace and contentment. Those are the things that fuel our resilience and remind us why we keep going.
And it's those moments that make all the hard work worth it.
Exactly.
And now we're going to look ahead to that transition into adulthood.
And it's a transition that comes with, a unique set of challenges and opportunities for autistic individuals.
Yeah.
One of the biggest shifts highlighted in the sources you shared is this move from the structured world of school to the much less defined world of adulthood.
Yeah, it's like being handed a blank map and being told, good luck, find your own way.
Exactly.
That's got to feel overwhelming for anybody, but especially for someone who thrives on, routine and predictability.
Absolutely. Think about it. For years, their days have been organized around school bells, set schedules, clear expectations, and then suddenly they're expected to navigate college jobs, relationships, independent living, all with much less external structure.
So it's not just about, teaching them those life skills like doing laundry or cooking.
Right.
It's about really helping them to develop that internal structure and self-management skills that they'll need to succeed in a less defined world.
Yeah, and a key part of that is self-advocacy. Can they articulate their needs? Do they know how to access resources? Can they set boundaries and communicate effectively in different situations? These are all crucial skills for navigating adulthood successfully.
Fulfilling adult life encompasses so much more, relationships, hobbies, passions, all the things that give life meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. And for autistic adults, finding and nurturing those meaningful connections can be so important, whether it's through shared interests, online communities, support groups, specifically for autistic adults.
It's about finding your tribe, the people who get you, who accept you for who you are without judgment.
Exactly. And as we've touched on before, disclosure of their diagnosis is a very personal choice. Some autistic adults find it really helpful to be open about their autism,
Yeah.
to advocate for their needs, and to educate others. Others might prefer to keep that information private, and that's perfectly valid too.
It's about honoring their right to choose what feels safe and comfortable for them and
Exactly.
supporting them in that decision.
Absolutely. And as they're navigating all of these complexities, it's important to remember there are resources available, support groups, advocacy organizations, online communities. These can be invaluable sources of information, connection, and shared experience.
It's that reminder that you're not alone, that
Now,
there are people who get it, who've been there, who can offer guidance and support.
and as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, hope. It's so easy to get caught up in the challenges, to focus on the things that feel difficult or overwhelming.
Right.
But it's crucial to hold on to hope, to believe in the potential of these amazing individuals.
Because with the right support and understanding and a willingness to challenge those societal expectations, autistic adults can live rich, fulfilling, and meaningful lives.
Yeah. Their journey might look different,
For sure.
but it's no less valuable or worthy of celebration.
That's a beautiful message, and that's really what I hope everyone listening takes away from this deep dive, a sense of possibility and hope.
Me too.
Thank you so much for being here. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this exploration of adolescence and the transition to adulthood for individuals on the spectrum. We hope it's given you some new things to think about and, most importantly, that renewed sense of hope and possibility.